question today is, what is innovation districts? And we're very pleased that Laura Williams, who is the strategy manager for World Business Chicago, is here with us today. As you know, World Business Chicago is a not-for-profit economic development organization with representatives from business and government, with the mayor as the chair. In its mission, the organization emphasizes promoting regional economic growth and positioning Chicago as a leader in the global economy. World Business Chicago has its own economic development plan, the Plan for Economic Growth and Jobs, and Ms. Williams manages its implementation. Supporting innovation and growing advanced manufacturing are central aspects of this plan. So we're really pleased that you're here to speak about innovation districts. World Business Chicago Director Jeff Mohorn is also on the UIC Urban Forum Advisory Committee. So we're very pleased that we have this connection with World Business Chicago. Joshua Drucker is a professor in urban planning and policy. He is assistant professor in UPP. He studies processes of regional economic development and transformation, particularly those affecting industrial structure. So he is the perfect person then to be involved in this conversation and to respond to some of the things that Laura will be presenting. Professor Drucker also researches the impacts of innovation, creativity, and human capital on firms and economies. Thank you, Professor Drucker, for being here as well. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Ms. Williams, and then after Joshua presents his comments, then we'll open it up for other comments, questions, and conversation. Thanks again.
Thank you very much for that introduction. As mentioned, my name is Laura Williams, and I'm a strategy manager at World Business Chicago on the implementation team for the Plan for Economic Growth and Jobs. In particular, I focus my efforts on the 9th of the 10 strategies that plan puts forward, and that is neighborhood and place-based assets, or leveraging them for economic growth. And part of the reason I'm here today is because we actually worked with Professor Drucker last year to commission a report on innovation districts. It's something that we've been thinking about for several years now, in fact longer than I've been at World Business Chicago, as a mechanism for spurring renewed growth in manufacturing or any other industry here in the city of Chicago. Innovation districts were something that were new to me in concept when I joined WBC. I hadn't really heard that term before. And so I was very pleased to get the research from Professor Drucker's class because it really helped define the idea for me. So what is an innovation district? Well, they take a lot of different shapes and forms. These are all actual plans from innovation districts around the world. The first and most famous is in Barcelona, Spain, but other cities in the US and around the world have also implemented these, from Boston to Detroit to Monterey, Mexico. So an innovation district, and I am just shamelessly stealing here from Professor Drucker's students, have a lot of key things in common. They involve major anchor institutions, such as universities or research centers, sometimes hospitals. They include space to incubate new businesses often, whether that's shared co-working space or maybe lab setups to help develop new ideas and launch them into the world. They also usually target a specific industry or set of industries. This is also known as sort of cluster economics or cluster development. It might be health and IT, it might be something more along the lines of manufacturing. Sometimes it's more general, just high tech or high-tech things. So that can take a lot of forms, but generally there's some sort of thematic coherence. They also usually are accessible. Transit, near transit, rail lines, they're not often only accessible by car. So these are an urban phenomenon. They're motivated by a desire, almost always, to spur economic development in a meaningful way. They aren't that is usually a guiding principle in why they're being designed and implemented. And finally, they generally, but not always, involve the public sector in a significant way. That might be changes in zoning, it might just be getting approval, it might be special incentives, but usually there's a thematic element of public sector involvement. So what makes an innovation district different from any other type of district? That's a very tough question for me, to be perfectly honest. Engagement of the public sector might be the first thing to think of, which I think might, I don't know what I did with my slides there, but there's one missing. In any case, usually involves the engagement of the public sector, but again, lots of other projects do as well, and not all innovation districts do. So that doesn't seem to be a defining characteristic for any specific reason. It might be special incentives. Maybe there are tax breaks or buy downs of labor costs. Maybe some sort of infrastructure deal that goes in with an innovation district. That happens all the time, but it also happens with lots of other district development, other types of planning processes, and sometimes it doesn't. So again, not a specific defining feature of this type of planning. Which makes me think that maybe it comes down to marketability. Marketing is increasingly important in economic development, especially for cities. World Business Chicago got its start actually as a primary role being business development, so corporate recruitment and retention to the Chicago area. And selling people on Chicago is the big way that we attract a lot of high-end jobs to this area. We're not the only city doing it, every other city does too. It's also why we have tax breaks for corporations, why film industries are targeted with all sorts of goods to lure them to film on our streets. So why not an innovation district? You can start attracting labs, maybe you would get startups from Silicon Valley, all sorts of things to spur new development and innovation. We've also got a great manufacturing base, which is another area where there's room for improvement, for advancing manufacturing and bringing more creativity into the field. When you draw something, give something special attention by labeling it an innovation district, you look more forward-looking and more entrepreneurial, really. The term hasn't worn itself out yet. And you're looking, and suddenly your city becomes dynamic, up and coming, and gives the impression that you can specially cater to these futuristic, forward-looking needs. In fact, despite the fact that my own strategy team at the Plan for Economic Growth has been thinking about innovation districts for years and how we might develop one in Chicago, turns out Chicago already has one. This was designated just a few months ago by the Department of Planning and Development, and you might recognize this if you're very good at maps or just already know about it. The Fulton Market District, just right at around Lake Street and Fulton Market, directly north of here, really, on this side of I-94. This was designated mostly for land use and zoning purposes. Historically, it's been a planned manufacturing district and other manufacturing use zone. A lot of it still is, if you can sort of tell on this map here that the writing is very small. But they're changing some of the designations. So there's still planned manufacturing, but there's now an innovative industries area, a business and services area, some design guidelines that have been implemented along the historic district that has also been established on the east end of the area. The other interesting thing about this, though, in comparison especially with other innovation districts in the world, is that most of those, especially Barcelona, are huge. I think some of them cover as many as 2 kilometers. And this, if you think about it, is a very small area. It's maybe you could walk across it in about 15 minutes in any direction. And it's also largely built up already. There are a lot of restaurants, a lot of old warehouses, and there's surely vacant space where new industries could locate themselves. But the perhaps most innovative thing about this area is that it's also where Google is located. Chicago, perhaps because this is small, is also thinking about designating future areas, innovation districts down the road. This is something that I have not seen specific plans for, but have heard talked about by the Department of Planning and Development. And so that's another thing where we have sort of diverged in our own planning from what the traditional innovation district model looks like. Often, again, they're one designated area in a city. It's large. It can encompass a lot of development, a lot of new development especially. And here we're taking several dozen city blocks and saying this is it, and maybe then we'll put one over here and one over here, which to me speaks again of very highly that this is leaning in a marketing direction and not necessarily any other special purpose. It's helping to say you should develop in this specific area and help bring this neighborhood up and make this neighborhood up and coming, and then moving around the city and continuing that type of transition and redevelopment. So is there something wrong with that? And I would say no. In fact, it's a great plan. Cities have a long history of selling themselves with whatever is hot at the moment. In fact, Chicago has been doing that, I think, since its inception. It's the reason it's a city at all. Booster is out in the world promoting it as a great place to do business. A good marketing campaign can, and some designations from the Department of Planning, or maybe just knowing that other similarly minded businesses might be moving in next door, is a great way to grow your business, is to grow a new industry, to bring creativity to the community, and to develop a more robust economy. I mentioned that we've been toying with the same idea for a long while, at different scales. Sometimes they've been very, very large. Other times more in line with the thinking that the Department of Planning took on here. And we're still thinking about this. One of the cooler ideas that we've been toying around with at World Business Chicago is the idea of a blue-collar innovation district, which is building on this nice little paradox there. You don't usually think of blue-collar jobs as being particularly innovative. But that's actually where much of the advancements in manufacturing are happening right now. You have to have a lot of technological skills, not only to have manufacturing jobs these days, but there's increasingly huge opportunities for creativity and developing new processes or new ways to engage digitally with manufacturing. The DMDI lab, I'm going to forget what that stands for, but located on Goose Island is a key example where we have a digital lab for manufacturing and some vacant space around it where perhaps co-locating businesses or incubators could really build a dynamic ecosystem. There's also the idea of maybe just laying infrastructure that would help to incubate and build an innovative industrial community by building hyper-connected neighborhoods, laying the infrastructure either through broadband, Wi-Fi, or other high-tech connectivity to cater to companies that are particularly technology-heavy. This is perhaps a little bit behind the idea of identifying Fulton Market as an innovation district. I can't say that for sure, but with Google there, thinking about the information infrastructure must be incredibly important and something that the city is considering. I can think of many other parts of the city where something similar might happen. The Lakeside development on the south side, I know that Cisco and other companies have been very interested in how they can be involved in that redevelopment. Maybe some of the manufacturing corridors on the south and west side where increasingly technology-driven technology-driven manufacturing is occurring. In any case, there are a lot of ideas, and I think that the moral of the story here, and for me, is that a special district for innovation is one not particularly innovative. It's about marketing and selling an idea, but it's also a very fluid concept that can involve a lot of different ideas that all work towards a good end, which is building a more robust economy for a city, laying the good planning groundwork that's necessary, including mixed-use developments, different tenure types and spaces, and all sorts of other planning buzzwords that I'm slowly forgetting as I get much older. That doesn't mean that innovation districts are not a useful idea. I think they push creativity. They push cities to think more about users and needs in some ways by thinking about who's going to occupy the space and what use they'll put to it. And with that, I think I finished much faster than I thought I might, and ready for any comments.
Should we do comments first, or should I?
No, go ahead, Connor.
Okay. Do you want me to move over there? As Laura mentioned, we've been working together on these ideas for a while, so this is kind of preaching to the choir in a way. But the good folks who organized this talk asked me to be a respondent, and to me that means to be challenging and to maybe be a little contrary. So I don't want anyone to take that personally, but I'm going to emphasize areas where I think I might take a different viewpoint than we have so far. Keeping in mind that, this is two-faced. I was also involved or at least helping direct some of the student work. So innovation districts, I think it sounds enticing, right? Has a big ring to it. And it seems, at least at first, to have much more upside than risk. Even the most expensive economic development approaches, and this is not one of the most expensive ones, but even the most expensive ones are minimal in cost compared to the other things that cities and regions do, like incarcerate people or educate them or build transportation infrastructure. So it's not a high-risk thing to be doing, and as Laura said, at the very least, it may simply be good marketing, a way to showcase a generally supportive environment for a targeted type of economic activity. And promotion certainly, definitely is a mainstay of economic development. Okay. On the other side, academics tend to preach caution with new ideas. In contrast with, say, Bruce Katz of the Brookings Institution, who's the most vocal proponent of this strategy. Academics, researchers, scholars were taught to be doubtful in general. And even beyond that general kind of conservatism, conservative with a small c, I think there's more concerns to be aware of here. I'm going to step back a little bit and give just a brief lecture diatribe on economic development practice. Okay. Many of you know that economic development has been remarkably susceptible to fads. The field has a strong tendency to be lured by the latest prescription, the latest and best thing that's going to solve our city's woes, build growth, do whatever it is that your goals are. And I can come up with hundreds of examples. I have 8 listed here that I came up with 2 minutes ago. Growth poles, urban renewal, targeting of incentives and subsidies, which Laura mentioned. Community-led economic development, which was a big buzzword in the 1980s, for those of you who are old enough to remember that. Small businesses, clusters, creative class, casinos and gaming. Okay, so I'm not arguing that all those are bad strategies and policies, though some were. A fad may place valuable attention on an issue or segment of the economy, even if it's not the most successful for boosting economic growth or development. And that's been true for some of the ones I mentioned, like small businesses, creative class. But when a new approach comes along, it often spreads really quickly without sufficient understanding of what the long-term outcomes will be, without what the trade-offs are, and in what kind of settings the approach is most appropriate to engage in. So that's why I think we need to step back here and be able to think about this idea. And I'll give as an example creative class, which is one of the ones I've written about. Richard Florida, its main proponent, went around on a world circuit and started promoting himself, became very rich, very famous, which is all good, and gave a lot of advice to places that really couldn't act well on it. So as the epitome of this, I know at one point he went to a small mining town in central Australia. Their mining output was declining and told them, you need to be the next mecca for gay and tolerant and in diversity-based activities. That was not a very likely message there, nor is it very successful. So why do economic development ideas spread? Why are they so faddish? First, it's hard to measure success. It's even harder to attribute it to the particular program, especially in the short to medium run that politicians operate in. Second, the competition is intense. And Laura alluded to this as well, right? Everyone's doing it, right? It's a worse tactic as a politician for a region to be inactive, to be viewed as other than at the cutting edge. That's worse than acting precipitously and perhaps being wasteful or counterproductive. So the impetus is to act, regardless of whether we know what the consequences are. And I think that this is problematic. It's inefficient, it's inequitable to allocate your resources without knowing what they're going to. Maybe we could put our resources into something better. Granted, it's not a huge amount of resources, but the amount of resources for economic development in general is not huge. Maybe we're going to be working against some other goals that we have in mind, such as inclusivity or helping people in most need first. One of the arguments that has been proposed against innovation districts, which I'm not really going to spend time on, is that they're a tool of gentrification. That it's going to bring new people to the area and not help those who are currently in whatever area is designated a district, whether that be businesses or residents. So I'm actually not going to go much into there, but it's something we really have not worked out yet. From a professional viewpoint, all this attention to fads undermines the legitimacy of economic development. It's sort of like Peter crying wolf, if every time we say, this is what's going to fix it, this is what's going to fix it, and it doesn't, maybe eventually they'll stop listening to us. Actually, they probably already have. But, we're not getting any better on that role. And I think the worst possibility is that we may actually cause harm. And here we can list some of those examples I mentioned before: urban renewal, growth poles, the subsidy wars, the incentive wars, these are not doing anybody good. Well, they're doing some people good. And on the whole, they're not a zero sum. They're not a positive sum game for the economy of the regions in the country. So I started out as a skeptic, and I've been thinking about this strategy for quite a while now, almost a year, which, so I'm putting that in context with people who've been thinking about it a lot longer. And I'm afraid that if we treat it as marketing only, we're missing a lot of the potential. So I don't want to leave that on the table. Seeming success stories, Barcelona, Boston, these are still works in progress. Barcelona's innovation district was formed in around the turn of the millennium, if I'm recalling correctly. Boston, the oldest one in this country, only 2010. So we're talking 4 or 5 years of history here. That's not very much. And perhaps it'll turn out that innovation districts is well suited as a strategy for only some limited set of regions, or maybe only in certain circumstances, and we just don't know that yet. So how can we judge? How can we assess the concepts and policies of innovation districts? If we don't have enough time yet to do empirical work, which is my favorite thing to do, we have to go back and think about the theory and the practice. Can we judge innovation districts in respect to the theories that drive it, the theories that we understand by how regions develop, and how economic development is practiced? This is not a replacement for empirical evaluation, but that's what we can do so far. So on theory, do the designs of the policy and our expectations for their effects match our understandings of how innovation works, of how innovation works in urban settings? And in practice, I'm going to go back to that question, do innovation districts represent a new idea? Is it something that we can view as filling a part of the portfolio that didn't exist? Okay, so even though I say I'm coming at it as a skeptic, my answer to both those questions, at least preliminary, is yes. I think there are ways to think that innovation districts are supportive of theory and also represent something new in practice. And some of these are things Laura already described. On the theory side, if we think of innovation districts as an economic development approach, if done right, it builds upon theories of innovation and entrepreneurship and agglomeration, these understandings of the regional economy and how it changes over time. It has to be done right in order to do that. We need to target particular sectors to gather critical mass, okay, for economic innovation actors to see a reasonable advantage to being in this district. We should build on anchor institutions. They provide a foundation of research, of knowledge for spillovers, of attraction for other firms and workers. They can provide some of the publicity that's important and also stability in the long term. And this, again, can be we can think of anchors broadly. They could be a university, they could be a research institute, like the digital manufacturing acronym that we can't remember. It could be another public institution. A convention center is the anchor of Boston's innovation district. It could even be a large, established private firm, one that you look on your website for, that makes a credible long-term commitment to an area. Districts should be appropriately sized. They need to be cohesive as a neighborhood, or as a district in any way. They should be promotable as distinct, identifiable places. The largest one in Barcelona is much too big for that, but they do have 5 subdivisions catering to different types of industries, so they may achieve that effect. The physical design should fit with how innovation occurs in urban settings, mixed use, transit-oriented style development. That fits with the ideas of importance of proximity and density for face-to-face interaction, for unplanned, spontaneous interactions, for, to use the technical terms that Farrah would be using, it's knowledge transmissions among people, which sounds very technical, but it's basically informations going from one person to another. We should provide fast, convenient linkages to the rest of the city so that we don't have to provide all the urban facilities and services in each district, but we can have access to them. And we should include cultural institutions and amenities. The generalized picture of this youthful entrepreneur looking for a hip and vibrant and active and modern community to live, work, and play all together. This is a stereotype, but there's some truth underneath that as well. On the practice side, innovation districts, if conducted in this and constructed in this manner, I think are something new. It's more than just an assemblage of individual policies that existed across the city. Creating a special district itself may not be a new approach. I definitely agree with Laura on that, but I think it's the combination of features here that characterize something original about innovation districts. First, these are not policies that are broadly in place everywhere across the city. The combination of policies, you may find 1 or 2 in different places, but it's the combination of policies altogether that form something new in the metro area. And I'll call this number 2, but it's really related. Planners are intentionally aiming for a complete entrepreneurial ecosystem that's healthy, vibrant, long-term, sustainable, recognizing that no single feature is sufficient. So we can think about a place like Baltimore, which has a major research institution, an anchor in the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, and in Johns Hopkins, but it doesn't have an innovation district. It's missing a lot of the other pieces. Or Cleveland, where I used to live, similarly, Cleveland Clinic, Case Western Reserve University, there's a whole cultural and arts center around the Symphony area, but they do not have what we're thinking of as an innovation district. So we need policies that support diversity in types and stages of innovative activity. A mix of large and small firms, a mix of established firms with new startups and spin-off firms. Active research and commercialization, so both the basic research and the applied to commercial interests, part of the pipeline chain. Anchor institutions, often public sector involved, but not necessarily. The policy should provide a range of long-term supports for entrepreneurship and innovation. So we're thinking about things including workforce development, entrepreneurial internship programs, and externship programs. That's a new word I've heard just last week. Externship is when someone who's working for one organization gets placed in another, such as our graduate student who might work for World Business Chicago as an internship. We could be calling that an externship. Make it a new buzzword. Co-work spaces, incubator or accelerator type spaces, venture capital, or at least some sort of innovative capital available. Not every kind of support has to be a part of all innovation districts, but there has to be this sort of range aimed at a variety of activities at different stages. And then the last thing I'd say that makes this different from previous district policies is that this is pretty proactive when done the way I'm thinking. It's not just a reaction. It's creating innovation or enticing innovation to an area through intentional policy action where it was not a main feature before. And so I think that there is something valuable here. It's more than just a fad. And I'd be disappointed if it turned out to be just promotion and marketing. Maybe some of the people that came there would be disappointed eventually as well if they didn't find lasting advantages in the area. So I should be wrapping up. This brings me to Chicago in particular. Are we doing this? Is the application that we're seeing so far matching these? And I'd say preliminarily, no. Okay, this is where I'm being confrontational. I did notice that Laura stepped away from World Business Chicago having any direct involvement in the existing Fulton district.
We did not.
So maybe this is not such a terrible thing to say, but I'd say that the Fulton market area is not meeting these criteria that I'm thinking about. Google is the anchor institution. Does that really represent a long-term commitment of an industry that's going to interact with others in the area? From Google's past practice, it doesn't seem very likely, at least not so far. Is it a proactive strategy? No. The district was placed here because of this existing move of Google from River North to further west, and because the city thinks it can leverage that into additional innovative activities, and it's listing all sorts of things as being innovative, which we may not really think of as an innovative economy, such as food preparation style. That gets to a creative class. The marketing approach, even if we restrict it to marketing, the marketing approach is far from clear. I was looking through the document that they put out. This is a historic meatpacking district, at least on the east side. The rest of it is mostly food preparation. There's some residential areas. It's still a center for food production and distribution, and that's what the plan says it's going to be. How does that mix with technology and information technology? It's not quite clear to me how those things match. I've heard about 3D printing of food for astronauts. I think that's a bit of a stretch. And the policies so far center on visual character and publicization. And, historic preservation, zoning, land use that have very gradual impacts because they're grandfathered in anything that currently exists. Land and streetscaping, promotion, marketing. The only policy I've seen specifically that reminds me of innovation is that they suggest there should be a food company incubator, and that's great, but by itself, one policy among many. It's not going to make this district stand out. So my students last semester came up with different areas that might be locations for innovation districts. And it begs the question, can a city have these multiple innovation districts? As Laura was saying, maybe that's a different model. Is it possible to have multiple simultaneous successful innovation districts? And here I worry about spreading ourselves thin. Right? If we're going to promote an innovation district in the city with something that makes it unique, well, it's not unique if you have multiple ones. Maybe this idea of targeting two different subgroups of innovation, blue collar, I like that idea better. I hadn't heard that before, at least not until yesterday when I got her notes. But I think that we are less likely, if we spread our resources thin, to have even one highly measurable, visible success. So that is a risk. I'm going to end my comments there, since I've spent about as much time with Laura. Open it up for discussion.
Great comments, questions?
Well, I think because we're talking about economic development, we tend to say economic development is the reason or end for a districts enter this, but I think with Fulton district, it was a place that was in desperate need of a plan. So it, was just knocked off kilter by the closure of cold storage and Google coming in, huge development pressures. And so, for years and years, there's been an effort to kind of separate manufacturing, economic development from housing. And so it was manufacturing district, it was planned manufacturing district. And so it seems to me there was simply just need for some tool to say we continue to want to have an emphasis on economic activity as opposed to residential, and to call it manufacturing that didn't cut it. There had to be something else. So it seems to me, and as a resident of this neighborhood, I think it's wonderful that there's a plan, but it seems to me it's not particularly relevant to me whether it creates innovation or not, if it makes a great place that adds to Chicago in many other ways beyond economic development.
I think that's probably a fair assessment, and what I would say, maybe this is a chance to realign, because I think I actually agree with almost everything you said, for the record. And that is that the way we're using innovation districts is more, especially here in Chicago, it seems like, more of a marketing tool, like throwing the buzzword out there saying, hey, there's one big tech company, can the rest of you join us? And the rest haven't been through the ringer quite enough to know whether it works as a cohesive strategy or not. And so it runs the risk of becoming sort of a fad that is just a name that gets thrown out there, instead of a suite of policy tools that get implemented to make a good planning district. So if it does have a good outcome, I think that's great. Whether that means that it was a good innovation district or whether it was a good plan, I think those are two different things potentially.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Well, my question was about that. Like, how do you evaluate how effective an innovation district is, and how do you, and it's obviously going to be dependent on what kind of innovation district it is. So I really like this idea of having different sectors like blue collar here and manufacturing over here. But how do you evaluate how effective it's going to be?
Well, when we evaluate anything that's effective at the Plan for Economic Growth and Jobs, we measure two things primarily, and that's the GRP, or the gross regional product, and the number of jobs. If you were really focusing on sort of new enterprises as a form of innovation, I think you could throw new business starts in there. The problem is if you're working at a neighborhood level, it's hard to get those numbers that are so finely grained. And so it is hard to know whether that policy had an impact as compared to other similar areas of the city because of this designation. But maybe there's some more thoughtful ways to evaluate here.
We are working on it. I mean, I would love to get in front of this idea rather than our typical approach, which is get behind and wait until later to knock it down after it's been 10, 15 years. So, the standard metrics, they pose difficulties. We're still working on it. I don't have an answer for you.
No, it's, to dive into something else slightly off topic, but working on the Plan for Economic Growth and Jobs, it's been active for about 2 years now, and that's something plan-wide we're struggling with, is how do we actually know whether we are moving the needle? And it's something you can't quite tease out of larger macroeconomic forces. So a lot of creativity will be called for.
I will say that if we end up with multiple areas designated as innovation districts, it only complicates the matter because there could be cannibalization from one to the other. How do we know that it's the innovation district here that was attractive versus they would have moved there anyway? Well, that counterfactual idea is hard enough when there's one district and there's a single border, but if there's multiple districts with different aspects, what we really, maybe some of this calls for qualitative analysis. Why did you move here? What's helping you here? That's the business.
So I work for a neighborhood economic development, speaking specifically to the Fulton market area, for a neighborhood economic development agency that provided input to the Department of Planning and Development on the plan. We ultimately supported the land use certification. What we're seeing in the area now is that the Fulton market, particularly since the Google announcement, the real estate market has just exploded. And what we're seeing now is that the types of companies that we would traditionally try and attract to that Kinsey industrial corridor, going from Fulton market all the way out west to Kedzie, blue collar jobs, companies that are going to hopefully grow quickly but employ people who are currently located in the city. They're totally priced out of the neighborhood right now. to speak to your point, Professor Drucker. And what we're seeing now is, the only companies that are sort of moving to the Fulton market area are companies with just huge amounts of capital that are usually bringing in people from outside the city, outside the state, outside the country in some cases to staff these extremely high-tech jobs. So I guess my question is are there any strategies in the Innovation District model to combat that?
Not as we seem to have, and no, I don't work for the city, and so I might be missing something, but not as I understand it in the plan that the city is implementing. I think there are potentially in other innovation districts, and I don't know enough to say for sure, but I know one of the characteristics that seemed common was catering to companies that are various stages in their life cycles, from startup through mature. So I think that would sort of address this issue of making sure that there were spaces available at sort of at a variety of price points and for a variety of sizes and scales.
Yeah, I mean, it's a win-lose situation. I mean, the city of Chicago wins when the real estate market booms in an area, even if local residents don't. So this is not unique to innovation districts. This is anytime you have successful local scale economic development, you may have this issue. So it's our standard repertoire approaches, like Laura said, different stages, maybe some subsidies, maybe, we think about affordable housing, so maybe there's affordable business space. Some of the companies themselves may be tapped to assist with that, to provide mentoring, to provide lower cost space within their own buildings. But these are new ideas that haven't really been implemented very much, at least in the context of innovation districts that I'm aware of.
No, I don't think so. I think co-working spaces and some of these shared spaces get at that to some extent. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with Catalyze Chicago. They are a co-working, shared space, shared equipment manufacturing incubator. They're really interesting, but manufacturing is capital intensive, especially designing and creating new products, and so they offer memberships to work there and use their machinery. But that allays some of their concerns, but they're seeing so much demand that they need to grow themselves and can't get over their own hump in growth. So I think that there are multiple layers, even as new solutions are coming about.
And this is mainly for early stage businesses too,
Yeah.
right? It's not for recruiting mid-stage, more established blue-collar working firms.
So I've been worried about it, despite having affiliation with Brookings. I've been worried that using this broad concept obscures the specific decisions that need to be made to accommodate the needs of particular industries or particular technological fields. Calling them all innovation districts tends to put the emphasis not only on marketing but on real estate, as opposed to production. Whether that's production of physical products or production of virtual products.
And I think that's a very good insight. Yes. I think I couldn't have summed up my own thoughts better as evidenced here. So. I think.
Professor Drucker, it sounds as though the description of your description of components of an innovation district have a lot in common with what used to be called the research park around universities, and that they came into popularity for about 10, 15 years, and then suddenly became unpopular and became an idea that no longer was viable as an economic development driver. What do you see as some of the ways that an innovation district could be different from a research park, and what are some ways that an innovation district could learn from the experiences of research parks?
Let me say that research parks are not unviable. I would say that we're not creating new ones partly because they're saturated in this country. There are enough of them. They're in enough places. But yeah, there are definitely declines in some of them. And I would go back to Brookings. I would say that Bruce Katz lists the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, which I'm intimately familiar since they still live there, as an innovation district. And so it's another evidence of this broad brush, which I there are a lot of similarities, really. I mean, a lot of the components are similar. Research parks were normally greenfield development sites near university anchors, very rarely in urban settings. And we've seen a general trend back towards cities in the last, decade and a half, both in economic development and in population. So you may just think of innovation districts in some sense as following that trend, and we haven't figured out how to build something in a site that people are going to love forever in this country, right? So, we may be replicating it now in an urban setting. On the other hand, I would say innovation districts in an urban setting have certain advantages that research parks never had. And we understand a lot better about how agglomeration works and spillovers work and the importance of density, not just as a choice, as a preference, but also as a functional aspect of how these districts work. And so a lot of research parks now are trying to densify, if that's a word. They're trying to create auxiliary units that are closer to an urban area. They're trying to increase their connections. And they're hampered if they stay in one place by this sort of greenfield area. Let me think of a particular example. In North Carolina State, some of you may be familiar, they have a millennial campus, because they built it around the millennium. But it's still in the city of Raleigh, and if you've been to Raleigh, Raleigh is the most sprawled, non-urban, non-dense place in the world, but it's still next to a university, an airport. It's in the research triangle. It's only a 10-minute drive from the existing research park, Triangle Research Park, 10-minute drive with no traffic, which makes a 45-minute drive. And so they're trying to take advantage of those things, whereas before it was, we chose this site so we can be close to the university, but really we're a greenfield site, we're a research park. Now they're exactly reverse emphasizing the same place and saying, hey, we chose this site because we're close to the more dense areas of this region, and we're not such a greenfield site. So some of it is promotion, and some of it is, I think, really that the city location offers a lot. I'm sort of flitting around here with different examples. I hope this is getting at what you're getting at. I would say that some research parks are still quite successful, and especially in Asia, we're seeing them called science parks, is what they're called in Asia mostly. We're seeing them, again, they were always more urban than the United States, and they're having no problems with science parks falling by the wayside. They're still doing more and more and more. So in some sense, it's the designation.
Well, and I might be wrong in my thinking here to some extent, but a lot of the research parks, or at least as I've seen and experienced them, usually don't have any emphasis or much focus on housing, or sort of this kind of mix of uses in a single spot. And so I think that that's another thing that innovation districts do try to bring to the table is there are residential uses, there are manufacturing or production or business uses, and there are also cultural and other amenities in the community, all in one mix.
Can I make a couple of observations? I was just looking at Built in Chicago's map about startups, digital startups, and they're all over the loop in River North, but not so much in this area. It seems to me there might be an intention on part of the city to try and pull this area into what's already a natural innovation center. That's one thought. The other thought is millennials who are being attracted to these new digital startups. I mean, I'm speaking from a transportation point of view. They don't want to drive, they want to take transit, and you have excellent transit access, particularly with the addition of Morgan Station on the Green Line. So, if you're trying to take advantage of what's already naturally happening and trying to expand it into a bigger, just a bit bigger area, I think it'd be a natural place to go.
Yeah, no, I think that those are both true statements. It'd be even better if they added a Damon stop on the Green Line. So if anyone has an extra $40 million they want to throw at the CTA, please do. But no, I mean, I think that that's probably a lot of what the city was looking at when they made the decision to go with this as a initial innovation district. And as I mentioned, I don't know for sure that there will be multiple, but that is what I have sort of heard rumored that down the road that there might be additional. It is transit accessible. It has a mix of uses already present. It has some character that's interesting. It's proximate to other innovative industries, and it has an anchor institution coming soon, as soon as the cold storage building is finished. So no, I mean, it does. It's definitely not a blunder. Whether it's necessarily sort of the best practice of an ideal platonic innovation district.
To me, it's a marketing point, just to add to what they've already got naturally, personally.
Well, now, just to say one thing, Boston's innovation district is not where most of their digital startups were before they created it. So Boston was also seeing that we had enough room, in the metro area at least, had enough room for multiple sites. And maybe, I mean, this is pretty small for a city the size of Chicago. So a lot of these innovation districts, we can live in Barcelona, a site, 100 city blocks or something. this is what, like 30?
Yeah, but if you include the entire central area, where
Right,
you're
so if-
it's huge.
So-
You could have pulled in the whole central area and called it an innovation district, because it's happening.
Yeah. I think there was, well, and this might be, I know in relation to the digital lab in Goose Island, there's been talk of some sort of designation similar to, if not the same as, an innovation district as well, since it's digital and manufacturing, and there is some space for new development there, as it's kind of at this nexus of Lincoln Park and Wicker Park and everything that is kind of still has space to grow. I think the biggest hindrance there is actually that it's not very transit accessible.
Right. Exactly.
I was wondering, how much research is there on this beyond the initial CATS, Metropolitan Revolution stuff? I mean, because I hear people talking about innovation districts and other innovation districts in the model, and it was never clear to me that there is a model here. There's never clear, I mean, how would I know there's an innovation district unless Bruce Katz tells me there? And so there's a little bit of a sense. I mean, always, to be honest, when I read the book, I felt like the innovation was attaching this really cool word called innovation to development efforts, and that was really what the contribution was. Is there more to it than that?
Well, that's why my students were essentially doing this research for Business
Yeah.
Chicago. We had the same kind of fear that this is a name and nothing more. And so the actual task in the class was do some research, see what's out there. Turns out academically at least very little, even popularly not that much. That's specific. And then consider what are people calling innovation districts? Do they have these common characteristics? I think it was one of her first slides was the result of my students investigating these various regions and figuring out which of these actually have commonalities and which of those commonalities are important. And that goes well beyond what the sort of fluffy Bruce Katz approach, which is trying to be, in my opinion, way too inclusive. And we discarded some things that are called innovation districts as not being that. And this is why I think maybe this Fulton district would also have been discarded had it been in our consideration, because we were trying to focus in on what is actually distinct, that we can call something distinct.
And so their work is beyond excellent, I have to say, and the grid that I demonstrated up here and that we're referring to, I mean, was very useful. What's interesting about it is there are several characteristics that begin to come about as transit access is actually the only one that's consistent across all of them. But most have, all but one or two of, I think there are 9 characteristics, which is, starting to build a fairly consistent designation. And I was trying to find in here where they actually sort of wrote a definition, sort of a word-based definition, and Bruce Katz's, just for the room, I'll go ahead and share it, is innovation districts cluster and connect leading-edge anchor institutions and cutting-edge innovative firms with supporting and spin-off companies, business incubators, mixed-use housing, office and retail, and 21st century amenities and transport. Several elements, and then going back to the students writing here, several elements can be noted from this definition: the emphasis on proximity, the importance of anchor institutions, the presence of existing firms and startups, and the necessity of mixed-use urban development. To these, we add several elements, such as public sector involvement, result of a stricter definition of an innovation district. To this we add several elements, the primary one being public sector involvement. So having a suite of policies that help to spur that innovative activity, which I think is fairly robust.
As far as we found last spring, there is no rigorous academic study of this, and there is no popular study of this other than being conducted or in response to the Brookings reports.
So there isn't necessarily a model, but a set of ideas here but I'm wondering how they could be applied at the neighborhood level to help them build and revitalize the neighborhoods.
That's a good question. Well, so that's what the work we've been doing at World Business Chicago and with the Plan for Economic Growth and Jobs has really been about, and why we've been thinking about innovation districts at all. I think there are a couple of things that we have shied away from and why we haven't taken any actions yet. One of them is that it seems that size is important. Most of the innovation districts are fairly large in scale and scope and encompass potentially more than one neighborhood. And so working across very practically so many neighborhood boundaries as well as aldermanic lines to get some sort of unifying sense of place is a struggle. I think the other thing that we've been conscious of is just how do you pick? How do you decide that this is an innovation district, ignoring the rest of the city? Why is this one more suited place than another? Given the different thematic elements that could be a part of that decision, maybe it's an area such as near IIT that has a manufacturing zone not too far away, room for new development, but a lot of existing housing and other amenities and resources that could help catalyze new development in that area. That's actually, if we were just kind of playing a game of develop this area of the city, I think that that's a wonderful idea and a place where a lot of things align to make it possible. Other partners of ours think Lakeside, the new development down on the southeast side, would be an ideal spot because there you're working from scratch and there's a lot of potential, but you're also then missing a lot of the existing not only infrastructure but residents and anchors that help make a place really dynamic and vibrant. Another option that's come up a couple of times now is near Goose Island in the River North area. There's are a lot of innovation activities happening there already. There's the new lab going in. But to a large extent, there's not a lot of room for new development or growth there. And so I think the idea is is there a need for doing this sort of designation? And if so, what does it actually bring to the table and change? So those are the thoughts that have been running through our head. I think that to a large extent, it does seem, especially looking at Barcelona, which has the longest track record, that these sorts of policies and planning in an innovation district plan can help spur job growth. It can spur the growth of small and medium-sized businesses in a community, which I think usually has an outsized impact on the neighborhood itself, which is great. Outsized positive impact, I should say. But I think a lot of magic has to happen.
I would just add that some of the districts that we looked at were explicitly designed as redevelopment strategies, not necessarily at the neighborhood scale. Barcelona is one of those, so is San Diego's, which is still nascent, so is Detroit's. But other ones were started totally in areas that didn't need necessarily a lot of redevelopment, or in new areas. Boston's was essentially a new area that had very little there. It was surface parking mainly. So there's a variety here.
In the back?
So is there any way to keep it from becoming kind of a classist or elitist thing? Like to look at it, innovation as broader than just economic innovation?
I hope so. I think that's maybe where some of our work exploring this idea of a blue-collar innovation district is trying to head, making sure it's an inclusive concept, one that could be applied in a variety of ways. The more you do that, though, the more I worry that we're just taking good planning and giving it a fancy name, so I don't know how useful that is. But my hope would be that, yes, it is something that is not elitist.
I wonder to what extent this name is like a compensation for the absence of other of productive anchor institutions that are already there, and what gives me this this hypothesis is to look at Boston, where the Boston Innovation District starts with nothing. Not there right now. Yet if you go across the river to Kendall Square, it's right next to MIT. Nobody needs to call it an innovation district in order to know that that's where biotech is happening in the Boston region.
That's true.
And maybe some attempt to diversify there too, because they're not emphasizing biotech in the innovation district. It's
Right.
much more like sort of computer tech and financial stuff. I mean, there's all sorts of little.
That actually makes sense for that area.
Right, because it's across from the CBD, right? But I had it written down what they were focusing on, but I think I have it here.
It's somewhere in here.
It was not biotech, right? So maybe, Laura mentioned maybe a blue collar type versus white collar that might be more simple, as Barcelona says 5 different sectors they're targeting and they're spatially delineated. They happen to be next to each other there, but maybe in Chicago they wouldn't be. There'd be the food and Google area, whatever that is. There'd be a manufacturing one around Goose Island, and there'd be something else around Lakeside, where U.S. Steel used to be. So something else down there. I don't know.
Design and
That's right, architecture, design.
architecture are also aspects of Boston's. In addition
Well,
to
industrial
finance.
design.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could go back and kind of expound upon the different policies that you kind of put in place to encourage this. I mean, the most immediate one is kind of tax breaks for innovative companies who are going to offer new jobs, whatever that means. But what are some other policies that you can use to encourage these companies to move into these places? I mean, because Fulton River District real estate's really, really high. So I was kind of curious, like, why wouldn't you pick a place where, you know, real estate's sort of cheaper, or something like that, like the Kinsey Industrial Corridor on Damon or something. But anyways, policies. What did you mean by those?
Well, I mean, I think maybe I'm just forgetting from reading, but there's not like a set of, at least to my knowledge. Tax breaks and other incentives have been used in various scenarios. I think just kind of, I'm going to stop there and let them provide.
Some other things that I listed very quickly is workforce development issues. So this is one of the ways it may be able to target local people if it's a restrictive sort of workforce. So what are the innovative skills that are needed? Can we develop those through K through 12, through return city colleges, whatever it is in the area? Laura mentioned co-workspaces. These have to have different permitting restrictions. Some of them can be public spec, which, you know, I don't know that Chicago's going here, but some of the other cities have done this, meaning that the public owns the space and then they sell it out, or they sell it to a developer once it's finished. So to get that initial ball rolling. There's localized targeted capital. Boston uses this. They have actually, it's mixed with their marketing strategy. They have a competition, like an entrepreneur competition. Get the best business plan and we'll help fund it. You know, and that encourages a lot of people to create business plans, even the ones that aren't funded. And then it's promoted and publicized. A lot of the efforts in a lot of these places is on the marketing and promotion, which is not just outside to lure firms, but it's also, hey, you want to start up a firm, this is a good place to locate it. So maybe try to go back to what Steve said, maybe trying to draw more into an area where innovative firms can be targeted and supported and coddled and patted on the back, as opposed to being spread out everywhere and not have the same sort of mentorship and capabilities. What else did I mention? Entrepreneurial internship and externship programs, those are often supported publicly, or at least publicized. If they're at public institutions, you might consider them donated, right? Incubator accelerator spaces, these are either public or private, and in Boston they have some of each. I keep going back to Boston because it's at 5 years the oldest example we have in this country. These policies have been done. Does that help? That's some of them. There's more, right? These are not one of these is innovative by itself, right? All these exist in other places. It's putting them together and targeting them at a particular sector and a particular location that makes it innovative, in my opinion.
Excuse me. So there's an organization called North Branch Works up on the north side that's currently conducting a study on the Finkel Steel site to explore the feasibility of what I guess you could call an innovation district, an advanced manufacturing hub. And this may be moot if they end up tearing all the buildings down like the current property owners want to do, but do either of you see potential for something like that on the Finkel site specifically?
I think so, and this is ringing so many bells in my head, and I'm not sure if it's just because I hear advanced manufacturing so often around our office. That's our first strategy on the plan for economic growth and jobs. But I think that actually we might be talking to them about that. I can't say that for certain because that's not where I focus my work, but I think I've heard of those things come up together in common. So it seems like it's feasible at the very least and worth further study.
So we want to go through that list of components and see if some of those things are present. Is it transit accessible? Is it, a dense area? Are there residences nearby? Is there a potential anchor? I don't know the answers to these because I don't know the site. This is what I would want to think about.
Way to bring some systemization there. That's good, actually. We should do that in a while.
Today.
Maybe, yeah.
Fantastic. Any more comments, questions? One more back here.
So the anchor institutions, do those usually have to be like a business
far, in most of the examples I've seen, they're often in university or potentially like a research-oriented hospital. Corporations have served the purpose in a couple of places, and I think Boston sort of leads on maybe not relocated, but having some specific industrial leaders. A community development organization would be an interesting approach. I don't think that that's been done, at least not to my knowledge. I think one of the things that can make it powerful, though, is having either ties to sort of research or industry to help unite those two, and I don't know if many community organizations would have that skill set.
This is not quite the same thing, but in Detroit, in Midtown, it's unusual in that it's a grassroots effort to have an innovation district. So the leaders of this are community groups. However, they are bringing together what they would consider anchor institutions. So they are the coordinators. They're not the anchors themselves. They're bringing together Wayne State University, Center for Creative Studies, Henry Ford Health System. To some extent, they're trying to get the rich sports people, you know, like the Illich's and the Monahans. What's the other one, though? Ford. You know, it's sort of right next to Greektown casino area, not Greektown, the casino area and the entertainment district. But they themselves are not the anchor. So it might be a more of an umbrella role, at least so far, what we've seen.
Or kind of coordinating.
Coordinator. Yeah, that's what I meant.
I would say that, kind of building off of that thought, I think if in any additional innovation districts or that type of work were happening in Chicago, engaging community organizations is absolutely essential to making sure that they're successful. Just because there are very few areas where you would be starting from scratch and not impacting existing residents in some way. That's the first way to make sure that you're not going to be successful.
Any more? Great, thank you. Well,